So how does a nation that was literally born from the idea that all men are created equal end up tearing itself apart in a brutal war over slavery? Well, it definitely didn't happen overnight. It was this long, 85-year journey of incredible growth, shaky compromises, and a crisis that just kept getting deeper. Let's trace that path, from the incredible promise of 1776 to the absolute peril of 1861.
I mean, these are the words that launched a nation, right? Such a powerful, revolutionary idea that a government's power comes from its people, who are all born with basic inherent rights. This was the promise of America. It was supposed to be the core of its identity. But here's the thing. From the very moment those words were written, they were haunted by a massive contradiction.
And this slide right here, it lays out that core conflict perfectly. On one side, you have this beautiful ideal of liberty for everyone. But on the other side, you've got the cold, hard reality that a huge chunk of the nation's economy, especially in the South, was built on the backs of enslaved people. So what that means is, from day one, the United States was basically a nation at war with its own founding principles.
So you might be asking, how did this massive contradiction get baked right into the system? Well, to even create a country out of 13 very different colonies, the founders had to make a deal. They came up with this brilliant framework for a government, but to get everyone to sign on, they made a really fatal compromise on slavery, embedding the conflict right into the Constitution itself.
So instead of actually solving the problem of slavery, the founders basically wrote it into the code of the country. Take the 3/5 clause, for example. This gave Southern states way more seats in Congress and way more political power than they should have had based on their free population alone. It was a political fix that literally protected the institution of slavery inside the nation's founding document, and it made sure the South had the power to defend its economic system. And, for the next few decades, this pretty much became the pattern. The country was growing like crazy, but every single time the issue of slavery threatened to blow it all up, the political solution was always to find another compromise, another temporary fix, anything to avoid a direct fight. They were just kicking the can down the road, again and again.
And then, this happened. 828,000 square miles. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The United States literally doubled in size, almost overnight. Look, this wasn't just some new land. This was a vast territory stretching all the way to the Rocky Mountains. And with it came one massive, unavoidable question. Would all this new American land be free, or would it be slave? The fight over all that new territory got so bad, it honestly almost broke the country right then and there. So, in 1820, this was the solution they came up with. The Missouri Compromise. See, to keep the balance of power even between free and slave states in the Senate, they let Missouri in as a slave state, but they also let Maine in as a free state. Then, they just drew a line across the map and said, okay, no more slavery north of this line. It was a classic political patch job. It kept the peace for a little while, but it solved absolutely nothing.
But that whole pattern of just patching things up, it couldn't last, especially with this powerful new idea called manifest destiny taking hold. This was the belief that the United States was, destined by God to expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But this very drive to expand would be the thing that completely shattered those fragile compromises holding the country together.
Yep, another war, this time with Mexico, and another massive land grab. This victory brought in the land that would eventually become California, Nevada, Utah, the whole shebang. All of a sudden, the whole slavery question wasn't some far-off problem about unsettled land. It became an immediate, burning crisis that you just couldn't ignore anymore.
Okay, so now we hit the 1850s, and this is where everything just starts to fly off the rails, fast. Every single attempt to fix the problem from here on out just made it 10 times worse. This wasn't a decade of compromise anymore. This was a decade of pure anger, violence, and mistrust that pushed the nation right to the edge. This timeline, it's like watching a series of hammer blows hit the Union, one after another. You've got the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which basically forced Northerners to participate in the slave system. Then in '54, the Kansas-Nebraska Act sparks a literal mini-civil war in bleeding Kansas. Then the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision in '57 basically says slavery is legal everywhere. By the time John Brown raided Harper's Ferry in '59, both sides saw each other as a mortal enemy. The trust was gone.
So after a whole decade of just one crisis after another, with trust completely shattered, it all came down to this: the presidential election of 1860. This wasn't just another election, you see. This was it. This was the final trigger that was going to push the entire nation right over the edge.
And when the results came in, man, it just showed a nation that was completely and utterly fractured. Abraham Lincoln, who ran on a platform to stop slavery from spreading any further, won the presidency. But this visual, it shows you the most critical number of all. How many electoral votes did Lincoln win from the entire South? 0. A big fat 0. The country wasn't voting as one nation anymore. It was voting as two separate, hostile countries.
You have to understand, for the South, this wasn't just losing an election. To them, it was proof that they had totally lost their power in the Union. They truly believed that electing a president from an anti-slavery party was a direct threat to their economy, their society, their entire way of life. For them, there was just no more room for compromise. This was the final straw.
And just like that, that slow 85-year unraveling of the United States suddenly turned into a sprint towards disaster. The time for kicking the can down the road was long over. The time for separation and for war had finally arrived.
It all went down in 3 quick, decisive steps. First, just weeks after Lincoln's election, South Carolina said, "We're out," and formally left the Union. Soon after, 10 other states followed, and they formed their own nation, the Confederacy. And then, on a spring morning in 1861, the first shot was fired at Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun.
So when those first shots finally rang out, it was about so much more than just politics or preserving the Union. This war, it was going to force an answer to the fundamental question this nation had been dodging since the very beginning. After 85 years, that deep contradiction could no longer be contained. And now, through a brutal and bloody war, the country would finally have to decide what that founding promise of equality truly, really meant.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us.